Maybe you tried D&D and didn't like all the random rolls and restrictive, rolls. Or maybe you saw my How to Play Fate video and said, that looks fun, but I want a little more crunch than that. Maybe you've never played a tabletop role-playing game and want an entry point that's easy to learn but with some fun depth. Or maybe you just keep hearing dorks like me talk about it and you want to know what all the friggin' fuss is about, so we're going to learn how to play the Cypher System! The Cypher System is a rule set that originated in the settings of Numenera and the Strange, but eventually was released as a system all its own for use in just about any setting. It's the brainchild of a number of talented people led by Monty Cook, a bit of a TTRPG legend among us old nerds. Cypher is this beautiful mix of shockingly easy to learn, but with just enough depth and mechanics to be satisfying. To make what is bound to be a pretty stupid metaphor, if you were to compare something like D&D to chess, Pathfinder would be like 3D chess, Fate would be, Pictionary, and the Cypher System would be maybe like Go. You can learn it pretty quick, but there's just so much more to it. Oh, and World of Darkness would be backgammon. Just had to get that in there. Anyway, it's time to learn the basics of how to play the Cypher System. The first thing we need to do is understand the basic framework of Cypher. The foundation of the Cypher System is around the D20, much like D&D. Gonna be a lot of references to D&D because I assume a lot of you know it, but if you don't, sorry. Anytime you, as a player, want to accomplish anything, that is called a task. The Game Master will determine if there is a chance for failure by assigning the task a difficulty between 0 and 10. You take that difficulty, times it by 3, and you need to roll that number or higher in order to succeed. So if a task is difficulty 3, you need to roll a 9 or higher. If it's a 0, don't roll because you did it. If the task is a 7, you need to roll a 21. Now, in games like D&D and most D20-based games, you would add modifiers to your roll based on your stats, proficiencies, gear, yada yada. This is where the Cypher System takes a bit of a strange turn. Instead, as a player, you have ways to adjust the difficulty. Skills. If you have a skill that relates to this task, it can reduce the difficulty of the task by 1 step if you're trained in the skill, and by 2 steps if you are specialized. Or alternatively, add to the difficulty of the task if you have an inability in that area. Effort. Effort is the act of using points from your stat pools to make tasks easier. We'll talk about the stat pools in a minute, but when you apply effort, it costs 3 points for the first level of effort applied, and 2 points for every level of effort applied after that, each of which reduces the difficulty of a task by 1. Initially, you can only apply 1 level of effort, but as you level up, you can gain more. Assets. These are anything that might help you out in a task. This could come from having a piece of gear that's particularly useful, or just something in the environment. He has the high ground. That's an asset. Assets can modify difficulty 1 or 2 steps at most. So, if that difficulty 7 task was to, say, pick a lock, and you had a skill in burglary, a set of high-quality lockpicks, and you just tried real hard, you could lower that difficulty to 4. So instead of rolling a 21, you would need to roll a 12. Which is not only easier, but also, actually possible. Sidebar, on rare occasions, you might have some kind of asset that's so minor the GM determines it only provides a bonus of +1 or +2 to your roll. But if things like that ever add up to 3, then change that bonus to a full asset that lowers the difficulty. These should rarely crop up. So that's how you roll and adjust the difficulty of tasks. What about the GM? How do they roll and adjust difficulty? They don't! Don't you dare touch that die, Game Master! Leave that die alone! Is a player attacking a bad guy? Then the player rolls an attack task. Is a bad guy attacking the player? Then the player rolls a defense task. All the GM gets to do is determine the difficulty of that task. Then the players use skills, items, efforts, begging to see if you can lower that difficulty, and then roll. And that is the basic foundation of Cypher. Next, you'll want to know about... Okay, I'm going to try and tackle the character sheet in the order that makes the most sense, in my opinion. And that means starting with stats. The most basic building blocks of a character are your 3 stats. Yep, just 3. Might, speed, intellect. Your points in these stats are a reflection of your character's general build, and you'll have a lot of freedom in determining where you allocate said points. Every task is associated with one of these ability scores. However, unlike the stats of, say, D&D, these are also a resource. A stat's value is also the max for that stat's pool. You draw from this pool of points to power abilities, and hey, these are the points you spend to use effort! Mystery solved! We now know everything about stat pools, right? I'm afraid that's not all. Notice how there isn't a spot on this character sheet for hit points. That's because your health is also represented by these stat pools. Yes, if you use effort or certain abilities, you're going to drain these stat pools, but also if you get hit by an enemy, then that damage is to one of your stat pools. If one of those pools hits 0, then you gain the impaired condition. If 2 of them hit 0, you're debilitated. All 3 and, well, you'll be rolling a new character, my friend. I personally love this because it adds this wonderful risk-reward mechanic. If one of your stats is low, will you risk draining it further to use effort in hopes of killing an enemy before it kills you? And for those of you worried that this sounds really harsh, there are easy ways for every character to gain a few extra points back multiple times a day using what's called recovery rolls, which recover stat points equal to 1d6 plus your tier, or level, which is not a ton but also not an insignificant amount. The first recovery roll in the day only takes an action, so you can use it mid-combat. The next takes 10 minutes, then an hour, then 10 hours. The next day they refresh and you start over. Anyway, back to the stats. You might also notice that they have something called an edge. An edge is a cost reduction you have for using that stat. For example, if you have some attack ability that costs 2 might to use, but you have a might edge of 1, then that ability only costs you 1 might. Or if you were attacking with might and decided to use effort, which normally costs 3 points for the first level, it would only cost you 2. But you can only apply your edge once within an action. So if you used that might ability that costs 2 and effort, which costs 3, your might edge of 1 would only reduce the total action, not each individual part. So you would pay 4 points from your might pool. And yes, this also means that as you gain more edge in a stat, you could also use abilities or apply effort for free. Next, Cypher, like so many TTRPGs, has skills, which allow your character to reduce the difficulty of a task for free. Thing is, there isn't exactly a set skill list in Cypher. There's a proposed one, but it might not make sense for every setting. Your GM could make one for your campaign, but typically they're either specific, circumstantial skills from your, let's use the word class for now, or just skills that you happen to think up. They should be in that middle area of not too broad and not too specific, so you can get relatively frequent use out of them, like jumping, intimidation, woodworking, and so on. Every skill should also be associated with a specific stat. So jumping might be a might skill, and lying would be an intellect skill. The skills that you start with are dependent on your class. Okay, enough dancing around it. Class isn't a great way to put it. Much like D&D has classes and subclasses that help define your character, Cypher has a descriptive statement. This statement is composed of a descriptor, a type, and a focus, and would be read as blah 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 is a blank blank who blanks. Each of these blanks will determine your stats, abilities, and skills. And of course, instead of starting with the first one, it kind of makes more sense to start with the second, type. There are 4 main types in Cypher. Warriors, who specialize in combat, they're the damage dealers. Adepts, who specialize in powers beyond the normal, they're the support class and casters. Explorers, who seek adventure, they're often jacks of all trade, good in combat and knowledge. And finally, speakers, who are good with words and people, who are good as leaders and manipulators. Now, each of these types is fairly broad and can go in a variety of directions. A warrior can be beefy and strong or extremely fast and graceful. An adept might be a peaceful druid who heals allies, or they might throw fireballs around and destroy everything in sight. Mainly, what a type gives you is your starting stat stuff, some broad abilities to choose from with new abilities to pick from every time you level up. But to help dial them in a little closer to your specific wants for your character, you're going to need to next choose a descriptor. Descriptors are kind of the overall adjective that defines your character. Now here's a big list of suggested descriptors, though you can work with your GM to make a custom one as well. Just ask yourself, if you were to describe your character in one word, what would it be? Are they cruel, tough, creative? Every descriptor will give you a few benefits. It can be bonuses to one of your stat pools, special bonuses to abilities, training in certain skills, inabilities in certain skills, and so on. They help to better define your character. So if you thought, well, my character is a really good fighter, so I think I want to go warrior, but I wanted them to be a charmer, so should I go speaker instead? I mean, you could, but you could also be an appealing warrior, giving you training and pleasant social interactions as a skill. Ta-da! So, descriptor and type can make some fairly unique character ideas, but where we really make our characters our own is with their focus. These foci make you unique and give you abilities no one else has access to. A focus could be something as broad as defends the weak, descends from nobility, or entertains. Or something as weirdly specific as exists in 2 places at once, grows to towering heights, or howls at the moon. It takes something that other systems might have as one specific ability or spell and creates a whole set of class features around it. Every time you gain a level, you're going to gain new abilities for this specific focus. A first-tier character who bears a halo of fire can enshroud themselves in fire, but at 4th tier can make a sword out of fire. What's more, pairing these with different types can lead to wholly different feels for some foci. A warrior who controls beasts has a decidedly different feel than an explorer who controls beasts. And yes, the book does have a guide for creating your own custom foci, so your imagination, along with the GM's approval, are your only limits. Now, optionally, there is also this part, type flavor or other. A flavor lets you customize or hybridize a type. Let's say you imagine yourself as a sword wizard. Well, you could be a warrior with the magic flavor, or an adept with the combat flavor. When you do this, you take some abilities from the flavors list and replace abilities on the types list. The other thing you can use this spot for is if the GM allows for extra descriptors or something. Like in a fantasy campaign, you might have bonuses from your heritage. Or in a sci-fi game, you might have bonuses depending on what planet or colony you come from. Alright, so you've made a blank blank who blanks. You know how to make a character in Cypher. Of course, they're just tier 1, which is basically your character level. Though make no mistake, a Tier 1 character in Cypher is still heroic and not a pushover like level 1 characters in other games. Still, how do you level them up? With XP, of course! To level them up, you will spend your experience points to purchase various advancements. You can add 4 points to your stats, however you choose, gain +1 edge in a stat of your choosing, add +1 to the maximum amount of effort you can use in an action, train or specialize in a skill of your choosing, or other, which can reduce armor penalty, add +2 to your recovery roll, select a bonus focus ability at Tier 3 or higher, or select another ability from your types list. Each of these advancements costs 4 experience points. You can only take each advancement once per tier, and once you've purchased 4 out of 5 of the advancements, you advance to the next tier, capping off at Tier 6, usually. So, how do you gain XP? Well, GMs can award it in a variety of ways. Your GM might give some out at the end of a session or at the end of a big battle. You might get it from story beats, or even from discovering a particularly powerful artifact. There aren't a ton of hard and fast rules for gaining XP, except GM intrusions. A GM intrusion is the most reliable way to gain XP and involves the GM introducing a complication or outright failure when it looks like the player should have succeeded. For instance, a player might just be trying to leap over a small gap that, with their skills, was a difficulty 0 and therefore required no roll. Or the player might have actually rolled and succeeded, but the GM instead proposed that maybe they didn't. As a reward for this, the GM gives the player 2 experience points. One that they keep, and another that the player rewards to another player whom they feel deserves it for literally any reason. Now, these intrusions should be used to make things more interesting, not as a way for a butthurt GM to be like, actually my cool monster's attack did hit you. It could be something like you tripping and knocking over the princess at a fancy party you were invited to, or a rope snapping as you were swinging across a raging river. It should be a fun hurdle to overcome, not the nuh-uh button. Also, as a player, if you really don't want to deal with a GM intrusion, you are allowed to refuse the intrusion, but you have to pay 1 experience point. Oh, so XP isn't just for advancing your character, but for refusing intrusions. Well, it can do a lot more than that. 1 XP can, yes, buy off an intrusion, but you can also spend 1 XP to suggest a player intrusion, changing a small part of the world in your favor. You could have an ally show up in town or happen to know a noble at a party. So long as the GM approves, it's a great way to get a little help. Or you can just spend 1 XP to re-roll a die and keep the better result. Even better, spend 2 XP to gain a temporary, very specific skill or ability for a single situation. Found yourself in the library run by the Moo cult? Why, your uncle was a member of the Moo cult, so you should have a skill asset when searching the library. Or perhaps an ability to deceive members of the cult with their handshake. 3 XP, well, that should be a less temporary benefit, like a new contact or a home or some wealth. You'll want to discuss this ahead of time with the GM, and they can weave this into the narrative. This should be something that isn't easily lost. Of course, all these are nice, but early on, saving up 4 XP to advance your character is certainly the more tempting option. Okay, enough. We made a character, we know how to level, tier them up. Can we please fight some stuff? Sure! In combat, everyone rolls a d20 for initiative, taking their turns from highest to lowest. However, if multiple players or baddies have turns in a row, they can actually go in whatever order they want as decided between them, allowing them to better plan what they want to do. Basically, you can just group turns if you like. It doesn't really matter. On your turn, you get to take an action. That's it, 1 action. That action could be to attack, to use an item or ability, or to move. Now, movements and attacks all take place within certain distances in Cypher. Immediate distance is anything within 10 feet, and you can melee attack anything within that distance. A short distance is between 10 and 50 feet. You can move a short distance as an action without failure, try to make a thrown or short-range attack at enemies within this distance, or move and make a basic melee attack. But if you move a short distance and attack, you'll need to succeed at a speed task with a difficulty of 4 or risk tripping or something. A long distance is 50 to 100 feet, and simply moving this distance requires a speed task at difficulty 4. Or there are some ranged attacks and abilities that can be made at long range. A very long distance is up to 500 feet, and beyond that is space. I don't know, it doesn't matter. This is a basics video, it doesn't come up. As far as attacking, melee attacks are either might or speed tasks, typically you or the GM's choice, I guess. Ranged attacks are typically speed tasks for physical stuff, or intellect tasks for special/magical abilities. Alright, so you know how you work, right? I mean, basically. But how do baddies work? Well, an enemy will have a level between 1 and 10 and a health pool. And that is basically all that's required. Now, how is that possible? Well, the baddie's level is the difficulty of every task you take against them. If you're attacking a monster, the difficulty of the attack is their level. So to hit a level 5 enemy, you would need to roll a 15. If a level 5 enemy is attacking you, you need to roll a 15 on a defense task. If you're trying to persuade a level 5 bad guy or NPC with your silver tongue, that's gonna be a 15 plus on the old D20. Also, by default, if you are hurt by an enemy, you will take damage equal to their level. So, level 5 enemy typically does 5 damage. If all of this seems just a little too simple, it kind of is. This is just the baseline for making an enemy. It works great for throwaway monsters and henchmen. But for more interesting fights, you can adjust things from this baseline with modifications. A modification is an aspect of an enemy that is a different difficulty than its level. A level 5 Katana Rex might attack at level 6, but defend at level 4. So it's easier to hit, but its attacks are more dangerous. And its attack might do 6 or 7 damage instead of the baseline 5. They can also have special abilities, just like the player. Maybe Katana Rex has an ability where if it lands an attack, the victim has to make a second speed defense roll or else is caught in the Rex's powerful jaws, taking an additional 5 damage every round they fail to escape. Did you figure out how you might escape? It would be a might task. And guess what level difficulty that task would be? 5, because it's a Katana Rex and it's level 5. Neat, huh? And finally, enemies can be adjusted with other quirks, like the Katana Rex might take 1 extra damage from fire attacks, or take 1 less damage from typical weapons. So we know how to attack and be attacked, but how do damage? In Cypher, you don't roll for damage. Things have set damage, the most common of which is weapons. Light weapons only deal 2 damage, but attacks with them are eased by 1 difficulty because of how fast they are. Medium weapons do 4 damage and can be used with 1 hand, and heavy weapons deal 6 damage and require 2 hands. Attack abilities typically also have set amounts of damage that they do specific to them. Boo, you say, boo! What about the thrill of high damage rolls? Static damage is boring! First off, when you apply effort to an attack, you can choose that it lowers the difficulty of the attack, or you can choose that the effort applies an extra 3 damage to the attack. So there's one option to up your damage. Also, some abilities apply extra damage to attacks. Finally, if you want your attacks to do more damage, roll good. If you hit with a roll of 17, you also do 1 extra damage. A hit with an 18 is 2 extra damage. 19 is 3 extra damage, or a minor effect like distracting an opponent, getting to move a short distance at the end of the attack, or pushing the foe away from you. On a 20, you can deal 4 extra damage, or impose a major effect, like disarming an enemy, knocking them prone, or stunning them for a round. Of course, with the good comes the Nat 1. Roll a 1, and the GM gets a free intrusion against you. Lovely. So that's how to deal damage, but how do you take what you're dishing out? I mean, you've got 3 pools of points acting as your health, remember? Typically, the standard is that you will take damage to your might pool first. Then, if that is empty, your speed pool second, and if both of the previous 2 are at 0, your intellect pool third. However, some attacks will specify a certain type of damage, like a psionic attack would damage intellect first. And if you didn't have points in your intellect pool, it would then damage your remaining pools in the standard order. But really, it's best to just avoid taking damage, so time to talk about defense tasks. In combat, a lot of your defense rolls are going to be speed tasks, which is how you avoid melee and ranged weapon attacks. So if you wanted to apply effort to them, you'll be spending points from the speed pool. If the potential damage is coming from poison, disease, or something that strength and health can help you overcome, then it is a might defense task. And if the attack is something mental or influential, then it is an intellect defense task. Oh, I gotta keep track of 3 defenses, it's ridiculous! Screw defense, I'll just wear armor! So long as you are skilled in its use, you can wear armor to reduce incoming damage. Light armor reduces damage by 1, medium by 2, and heavy by 3. However, this armor also increases the cost of using speed effort by the same amount, per level of effort. So if you are wearing heavy armor and try to apply 2 levels of speed effort to a task, instead of 3 points for the first level of effort and 2 points for the second, it would be 6 points for the first and 5 for the second. Not being proficient in an armor makes this penalty worse. But some abilities, and this stuff up here, can reduce this cost, thankfully. And, well, I think that's combat. I don't know, whatever. This video's too long for a basics video. Moving on. Yeah, baby! It ain't called Cypher for nothing. Ciphers are items or abilities that are single use. They can provide anything from some healing to changing your size for an hour to giving you the ability to climb walls like a spider for 10 minutes. When ciphers are physical items, they are called manifest ciphers. In a fantasy setting, they could be potions, scrolls, powders, etc. In a sci-fi game, they might be alien crystals, grenades, or nanogels. The books have big lists of ciphers, but the GM is also free to create their own. Non-physical ciphers are called subtle ciphers. You would use subtle ciphers as just little bonuses or ability boosts in games without powers like magic or sci-fi tech. It's a way to give one-use bonuses to normal people-style characters, like in a modern or horror setting. This could be represented as a bit of good luck to re-roll a die, a free recovery roll, or even just a generic bonus that you could figure out later. Your character's type will determine the maximum number of ciphers you can have on you at any one time, which is usually just 2 or 3. The reason it's so few is because the GM is encouraged to reward players with ciphers regularly so that you can feel comfortable using them regularly. The book has options to reward them randomly, but they can be gained purposefully as well. Ciphers make great treasure or can be fun to purchase from shops. Whatever, use them how you like. Of course, one-use powerful items are cool, but what about gaining some real powerful gear that lasts, magic weapons, and cool utility items? That's where artifacts come into play. Artifacts are not unlike ciphers in that they typically give you a special ability. It might be a special attack, or might make you fly, or who knows what. The books have plenty of suggestions, and you can easily make up your own. One thing to keep in mind, many artifacts have what is called a depletion, where after using the artifact, you roll the listed die on the depletion, and on a roll of a 1, the artifact runs out of power and is maybe even destroyed. Whether or not it can be recharged is up to the GM and the campaign that you're in. As a GM, if you don't like the randomness of depletion rolls, feel free to give items a certain number of charges instead. I promise, I won't tell Monty about your homebrew sins. Alrighty, and next is, well, that's kind of it, at least for the basics. I'm sure I missed specific things, and there are going to be more specific rules for certain situations, but I hope that with this video, that you have enough information to go ahead and try out the Cypher system. The basics of the 1 to 10 difficulty and players always rolling is such an easy thing to play, and more so, it is a really easy thing to run. It's such an easy system to get into. Plus, if there's a specific setting that you're interested in running but you don't want to figure it out on your own, Monty Cook Games has released a bunch of supplements for different settings. Anyway, this video is already way too long, so I hope that this has encouraged some people to try Cypher System or hopefully helped you understand specific parts about it. Honestly, this is maybe my favorite tabletop role-playing system of all time. And that's saying a lot. I've played a lot of them. I've played 4 different editions of D&D alone, 2 different editions of World of Darkness. I've been all over the place, man. Cypher's just so much fun to get into, and you get to make such interesting, unique characters with powers that reflect that uniqueness. In D&D, if you make a sorcerer, I bet you have Fireball, just like every other goddamn sorcerer! So yeah, please check out the Cypher System, check out my other videos. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you want, touch a bell. Thank you all so much for stopping by. Class is gonna go and cry, 'cause I'm so hot in this recording booth. It's way too hot in this recording booth, I gotta go!